I've always sort of made it a point to talk about the better aspects of the pirate scene in previous episodes. Even the rather unfun Angry Birds game can at least be described as competently programmed and an impressive experiment at the very least. This previous statement serves primarily to create a dichotomy between today's topic and those aforementioned games. Pokemon is a series that I'm surprised I haven't talked about before on here. Its wild popularity and tendency to show up in the media might just make it the most recognizable game series in history, second only to Pac-Man perhaps. Such success, of course, could only mean one thing: bootleggers. It never ceases to amaze me just how many Pokemon bootlegs there are, and more so how good many of them end up being. Pokemon Yellow for the Famicom in particular is a rather impressive work that I hope to talk about on a later date. Sadly, even the greats must fall, which I feel is no better demonstrated than in Pokemon Gold and Silver for the Super Nintendo, a platformer Pokemon game which has many interesting elements, but sadly falls flat. Like pancake levels of flatness. It's very, very flat.
Mike the Gamer Guy.
Pokemon Gold and Silver actually begins out somewhat impressively. For a Super Nintendo game, the graphics here could definitely be worse, but I wouldn't call the graphics necessarily great either, especially as we go on into the actual game. The game actually has a character select option, which I always love to see. You have the choice between two starters from Pokemon's Johto region, Chikorita or Totodile. As you can see, they have different names here, but if I'm correct, and this is just conjecture on my part, they seem to be mistranscribed Romaji of the Japanese names. I look at these characters as essentially an easy and hard mode, respectively, but I'll get into that in a bit. The game itself, at least initially, seems to be a very basic platform game. You can jump and shoot, just like Mega Man or Contra, but not really, those games are actually fun. The main culprit here is a deadly combination of strange and spotty controls, poor level design, and an endless number of glitches. Let's start with control. As I stated in my Mr. Gimmick review, control is an essential factor in the enjoyability of a game, and if Gimmick is the epitome of good control, this could be easily described as the antithesis of that. It's not impossible by any means, but where Gimmick is flowing and feels really realistic, this is jarring and super inauthentic. The jumping especially is, to put it lightly, an absolute nightmare, which I never got used to. Besides movement, the attack and special move controls are also pretty unreliable, which is especially strange. Usually even the worst game designers can pull off simple one-button actions competently. In the case of the attack, there's an extreme lag between the input and the response, which makes hitting enemies super difficult. And as for the special moves, they don't seem to work at all some of the time. In fact, I didn't even know that special moves existed for most of my first playthrough of the game, because the buttons seem to have no effect at all. Criminally, the game is nay unbeatable without the use of the special moves, more specifically Chikorita's. I guess I should make a detour here and talk about the game's difficulty. Essentially, the character select also doubles as a difficulty select, Chikorita being an easy mode and Totodile being a there's no way you can win, give up on life mode. The reason for such differences in difficulty comes down to the aforementioned special moves. Chikorita's is the ability to fly, which makes the platforming sections in the game actually achievable, and Totodile's is the ability to freeze enemies, which is worthless and dumb. The problems as far as difficulty go really don't start until the second level, where you fans of Dino City will realize that the designers of this game have burgled many of the graphics from. Here they introduce sliding and floating platforms. With hit detection that barely qualifies as such, and without the ability to fly over these parts, the game becomes almost unbeatable. Conversely, when you do have the ability to fly, the game is stupidly simplistic, and beatable in well under half an hour, assuming you don't encounter any game-breaking bugs or glitches. Glitches, by the way, are something this game is very prone to. I'm not going to document them all here, but let's just say that things get pretty weird. If this all seems jumbled up and gross, let me just say that it is. The best way I can describe the gameplay is by saying that it is simply a mess. I would now like to take a moment to talk about music, graphics, and other aspects not directly related to the gameplay. I mentioned earlier that the graphics weren't bad, but they aren't really good either. In-game, the sprites are big and competently drawn, especially the game's end boss, Mewtwo. All the characters and backgrounds are also nice and colorful. The real sticking point here is the animations on the various Pokemon. They're kind of choppy and bleh. Well, at least the Pokemon look nice. The music here is repetitive and pretty bad. It's what you would expect from your average pirate game. They certainly aren't any Hummer team. Overall though, my biggest complaint here out of everything, including the gameplay, is that this game just simply doesn't feel like a Pokemon game. Unlike some pirates I've played, namely Pokemon Yellow for the Famicom and Pokemon Blue Sea Edition, this one has none of the charm or heart of the series at all. In particular, this ending is just awful and really cemented this feeling for me. Well guys, thanks for watching, and here's to hoping to better Pokemon bootlegs in the future. See ya!